Imagine you're trying to buy a birthday present for your child or your spouse or your loved one or whoever, right? But suppose you can rank all the possible birthday presents, and suppose there's no upper bound, the birthday presents just get better and better, and you really love this person, so you want to pick like the ideal birthday present, right? So the argument says, well, you can't do that because there's no perfect birthday present. Well, here's the response, and it's obviously an analogy for the multiverse response. You buy all the presents above a certain level.
In the last episode of Open Electives with Professor Kraay, we talked about possible ways which the multiverse could exist, and what the multiverse could possibly look like. In this episode, we'll be looking at how philosophy of religion connects to the idea of a multiverse, and whether the multiverse is something which supports theism, or the idea of atheism, or maybe both.
Maybe this will help. So you've heard this expression, probably, the best of all possible worlds, right? Have you ever heard that expression before? It's a famous philosophical expression. But, we have this kind of rough and ready idea that there's a best way that things could have turned out. And usually people say, oh, this right here, this reality we're living in, this is not the best of all possible worlds, right? But anyway, if you're familiar with that idea, then you're basically familiar with the idea that there are different possible ways that things might have turned out, right? And this has all sorts of connections to philosophy of religion. There's two big connections, and I think it's really interesting. So one thing that happens is, in philosophy of religion is people try to argue for and against the existence of God, right? That's not the only thing that goes on in philosophy of religion, but it's an important topic. So multiverses come into the picture connected to two of these arguments. There's an argument for the existence of God that I can talk about if you like, and multiverses are used as an objection or a criticism to this argument for the existence of God. But then, on the flip side, there's an argument against the existence of God, and multiverses are used there too as a criticism or an objection to that argument for atheism. So I'll start with an argument for the existence of God. So it was really a family of arguments, but anyway, there are so-called fine-tuning arguments for the existence of God, and this may be familiar to you. So here's the idea, right? We're here on Earth, and we know that there is life on Earth. We may not know if there's life anywhere else, but we're pretty sure there's life here on Earth, right? And scientists tell us that things had to be just so for life to be possible, right? Like if gravity had been just a little bit weaker or just a little bit stronger, life couldn't have happened. The Earth wouldn't have been orbiting around the sun in just the right way for temperatures to be just right for life to form. And that's just one example. There's all kinds of physical things that had to be just so for our universe to be, here's the technical term, biophilic, life permitting. Okay, so you can imagine a bunch of dials. Here's the idea, right? There's all these dials, and the inference is supposed to be, well, there was some being who turned all the dials just so that the conditions were exactly right for life to flourish. Okay, so that's the gist of the argument in kind of a non-technical way. It's so improbable that life form on its own. Things had to be just so that the argument says, well, the natural conclusion to draw is that there was an intelligent force or forces who set things up to be so that our universe would be life permitting. Now, there's a whole bunch of criticisms of that argument, and one of them involves multiverses. And in a word, it's this, right? Maybe this isn't the only universe. Sure, the conditions are just right for life here, but if reality had sort of spit out billions and billions and trillions, or maybe infinitely many universes, then statistically speaking, if the universes vary randomly in their initial conditions and so forth, then statistically speaking, it's virtually certain that at least one of them would be life permitting. So it shouldn't surprise us that at least one universe is life permitting. It was almost bound to happen. It's like if you roll a dice a certain number of times, it's almost a certainty that you're going to roll a 6 once. Okay, well, this is a much bigger dice, of course, but if you generate enough universes, if there's some mechanism that generates enough universes, sooner or later, one of them is going to turn out to be life permitting. So remember that expression, the best of all possible worlds, right? So just imagine in your head, right? Imagine a perfect reality. What would that look like for you? Okay, you don't have to give me details, but suppose there is something like that. Right, well, we know that phrase, the best of all possible worlds. But maybe some people have said there's no such thing. Maybe for any possible world, there could be a better world. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that's the way it is for sure, but let's just explore that hypothesis. So here's the idea. There's a state of affairs or a world or whatever you want to call it that's this good, and then there's one that's this good, and then there's one that's this good, and there's no best because, my hand's going to go off the screen, they keep getting better without any upper bound. Kind of like numbers. There's no greatest number, right? So there's no greatest world. For any world, there could be a better one. No matter how good, Nick, you tell me a certain world is, I can say there's a better one. Just like we say with numbers. I say, Nick, pick me the largest number. You give me a suggestion. I'm going to be able to come up with a better number, right? Okay. So suppose worlds are like that. And worlds are just ways that things might have turned out. So things could have been worse. Hitler might have won the war. Things could have been better. We could have dealt better and more quickly with climate change. Things could have been better and better and better. Okay, so that's the scenario. There's this infinite hierarchy of better and better worlds. Now let's talk about God. Suppose that what God brings to the picture here is that God decides which of those worlds is going to be the real one. Which of those worlds is going to be the actual one. Okay, a lot of theists believe that. So then the question is, all right, which one's God's going to pick? Okay, imagine world number one is like just barely good, right? It's not really particularly great or anything. World number two is a little bit better. World number 777 is pretty good. World number 888 is even better. And they go up and up to infinity. So you're God, and you're thinking, which world am I going to pick? Okay, here comes the argument for atheism. Whichever world God picks to make the real world, God could have picked a better world. That's just sort of given the hypothesis we're playing with, right? So God always could have picked a better world. Well, some people say that means that God could have done a better thing. It would be a better thing to do to pick a better world. But that means some people say that God could have been better. And typically, theists want to say that God is not improvable. God is a perfect, unsurpassable being that couldn't have done better, couldn't have been better in any way. So the idea is this: if there's an infinite hierarchy of better and better worlds, then God is impossible. So it's an argument for not just the falsity of God's existence, not just the falsity of theism, but for the impossibility of theism. I mean, I'll give you an analogy, right? Suppose you really love wine. Okay, this is not my analogy. A famous philosopher came up with it. Suppose you really love wine, and suppose I give you a bottle of wine. You know how wine gets better over time, right? In fact, wine gets better over a time for a while, and then eventually it gets worse and turns into vinegar. That's how things really are. But I'm going to give you this really special bottle of wine. Special bottle of wine is called Ever Better Wine. And here's what happens. It always gets better. There's no day that it ever gets worse or stays the same. Every day is a better day to drink that wine, okay? Now, suppose you're like the ultimate lover of wine. You just love wine so much you want to drink the best wine. What day are you going to pick? Now, also suppose you're immortal. Okay, so you're never going to run out of days. What day are you going to drink the wine? Any day that you pick, you could have had a better bottle of wine by waiting one more day or one more week or one more century. So the claim is you're never going to have the perfect day. And likewise, in the case of God and possible worlds, the claim is God could always have done better. And now you and I aren't perfect pickers of wine. No one said we were. No one said we were perfect. But God's supposed to be different, right? God is supposed to be completely perfect, unimprovable, and so forth. So that's how the argument's supposed to work. One response that people have given says, well, look, here's what God's going to do. God's going to find a level in this great big hierarchy, and God's going to basically make every reality that's higher than that level, okay? So God doesn't have to pick just one. God's going to pick all of them. More precisely, God's going to make all the universes that are good, and of course, none of the ones that are bad. And so that's supposed to be a way to get around this argument for atheism. It's not like God has to pick just one, and then there's this worry about improvability. God's going to somehow or other make all of the good universes, all and only the good universes.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to support Burnout and the Open Elective series, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel and giving us a like. If you'd like to donate, check out our Patreon. Link is below. Also, be sure to check out our website and give us a follow on social media.